3, 2, 1. Welcome to the David the Dog Trainer Podcast, episode 153. And today we're filming a podcast, obviously. And I felt like the other day I was like, I'm so ready for this podcast. Mm-hmm. I felt like I was like as prepared as you possibly can be.
Yeah.
And we went to come up here and start recording. And for whatever reason, I just had a temporary moment of, I don't think I'm as prepared as I think that I actually am. So I've got some stuff to talk about, and I've got some stuff to go over, but we're going to be kind of organically flowing through the conversation, if you will.
I
don't know what it is. Like literally up until I sat in this chair, I was like, yeah, I'm ready. And then I sat up there, I'm like, am I ready?
Am I ready?
I'm not sure. I'm actually not sure if I am, in fact, ready.
Well, the last podcast, which is coming out today for everybody, it was a very draining podcast. It was a lot of information to take in, with Dr. Melanie.
Doc.
Yeah, the doc was on.
What did you think of that one? I
loved it. It was just like, I was too enthralled in the conversation to like kind of even, I try to put my little 2 cents in, but it's just like when we talk to somebody, especially with like credentials like that, I'm just like, I'm going to let you just, you take the helm,
Gotta just let it rock and roll.
Yeah. But it was really cool. And it was nice to like hear her perspective on kind of the same feelings that we have on things. Sure. But, it's like she's in the neuroscience, area. Yeah. So it was cool to have a lot of agreeing outlooks on things. How about you? Did you feel like there was anything that maybe she said that you were like, or were you pretty much in agreement with everything?
No, I think it was good. I think the interesting thing is it was almost like some of the areas of the conversation felt almost like when we watched some of the videos and we're doing some of our own research, which was just like continuing to reassure that like we're just speculating on all of this, and obviously in her case, like speculation with much more knowledge, right?
Yes,
which was good. I thought there was a lot of similarities. I thought it was a good conversation, and I think really, as we approached the end of the conversation, I listened back to the whole thing. I don't generally listen back to the podcast, but that one in particular, I listened back to the whole thing because I wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything from it. And the whole last half of the conversation, I think, was really, really good. So if you guys haven't listened to it already, definitely go and listen to podcast 152 because I think it was it was a really interesting conversation for sure. Yeah,
and it makes me just want to have more like people like that on, just experts in certain things that we have the burning questions for,
Yeah,
and
like
I think it's
different
going to pop
actual
off.
perspectives on things.
Yeah.
But
speaking of popping off, I saw that training video you posted on YouTube got like a bunch of views for the YouTube
new
channel.
One, the walking one.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people have been telling us that they've been digging the like short videos we've been doing. And Paige and I actually just had like a little bit of a meeting on Saturday to kind of talk a little bit about it. We filmed 2 newborn trains that got dropped off and, their first social in the facility and stuff like that. It's just, I think we're going to start trying to steer more towards doing predominantly that stuff and then sprinkling in the vlogs, in between it, but doing less vlogs, more of that kind of stuff. I just think the bite-sized pieces of information and singular training sessions and stuff have been really good. Because Paige brought up a really good point, like, in that particular video, right? That was a video of that dog that spent the weekend here that we were talking about, that we did the social with. We did, I think, 3 or 4 videos with him. We did the social one, which was like, hey, this is how we helped him overcome the issues from the standpoint of his socialization. Yeah. We did one that was tightening up his commands, so working through some of the obedience training and helping him to help, more so helping the owner to understand how her timing with things and her communication and her markers and stuff like that played such a big role in helping him overcome some of the obedience problems she was having. And then we did one on leash walking as well. And what we did is we encompassed, like over the course of those 4 days, we progressed him all the way from like fixing his sloppy leash walking to getting it really good with just leash and prong to generalizing to another environment to then transitioning to the off-leash healing with the e-collar. And we showed in that video the entire progression of those 4 days and how we kind of worked him through all of that. And it was great. But anyways, one of the comments on it specifically was like, let's see you do that with a really hyped up pit bull or something like that, right? And I was like, actually, Paige said this. I think I thought it when I saw the comment, but she was like, I don't know, like people, like everybody thinks their dog is different, you know? So it's like what Paige liked was even though contextually, as we do these videos, there's going to be a lot of similarities of like leash walking. We teach leash walking in pretty much the same way with every dog that we work with, right? But showing that same process with all sorts of different types of dogs, like your really fearful dogs, like 6 and 7 when we did theirs, right? Like your just dog that's kind of sloppy on the walk, like Oliver was. Like these 2 new board and trains that got dropped off, we're doing it with them today after we film this podcast. Obviously, we're going to go there and Paige and I are going to film the leash walking section with them because they're 2 really, really fucking reactive dogs, right? Yeah. And actually, these 2 particular dogs, they got dropped off because their owner she broke her arm like 2 weeks ago because these dogs pulled her down.
Oh my gosh.
Right? Pulled her down and like snapped her fucking arm in half. Right? And they're not aggressive, right? They're just fucking out of control. Yeah. Right? And they're reactive and they're out of control and it's dangerous. And then the mom, she's watching the dogs. Months ago, she said that these dogs pulled her down and she broke her rib. So these dogs have 2 broken bones under their fucking belt now at this point. Jeez. But it's like, you know, this is these are 2 very different dogs than the last 3 that we've done it with, right? And then we'll find a fucking really aroused pit bull to do it with, right? And we'll just show everybody there are going to be some nuanced differences, obviously, from the standpoint of, you know, how much motivation we need to use, which tool we lean more heavily into, you know, other nuances, right, to it. But it will work with any of the dogs. Yeah, it just will, right? And that's really what we want to kind of keep showing people is that, like, your dog's not different. Everybody wants to think their dog is different, but they're just not, right? Yeah.
And I think it's good that you're showcasing this stuff again, too, because it's like, you know, like on here, we react to people, like, doing that stuff. So I think a lot of people just want to see you actually, like, do the stuff that we talk about on here, you know? And the vlog was cool to do that, but, like you said, sometimes, like, just having that, not that it's short form content, but it's, you know, a little more digestible because it's like you're focusing on that singular thing. But I think the vlog has its place. Yeah. The podcast has its place, but I think that was kind of something we were just missing a little bit was having those kind of like training videos again.
Yeah, things just got a little too buried in the vlog, which was the issue with that, obviously.
Yeah, so. Which you're making clips out of it and stuff too, but I don't know. Just having like a dedicated video seems like if it just feels good, you know? It feels
good. So that's new. Yeah. So we're going to kind of start getting into some of these miscellaneous topics here. So again, what I want to do today is we're going to just highlight some specific dogs we've been working with, and I want to discuss some kind of out-of-the-box solutions we've been implementing for some of these dogs. Okay. And just kind of brainstorm that a little bit. So we've had 2 dogs we've been working with over the last couple of weeks. One is a Beagle, one is a Chihuahua, right? Both of these dogs have quote-unquote owner/handler aggression issues, right? Which we talk a lot about. Inner household aggression issues, whether it's towards other dogs in your house or whether it's towards the owners of the house, they can be really freaking hard to work through, right? And the reason for that is because with dogs that are aggressive towards people outside of the home or dogs outside of the home, you can manage that very easily and prevent the dog from rehearsing the behavior. But when it's in the house, it gets very, very, very tricky in order to do that. So we'll talk about first and foremost with both of these dogs, kind of the extent of this aggression problem that they're having. And then what we'll do is we'll talk about some of the solutions we've been implementing them. So we'll start with the Beagle, right? So the beagle is like under a year old. He's pretty young, right?
Oh boy.
He just has this thing where he doesn't want his mom to touch him. That's it. Just doesn't, right? He doesn't outwardly display aggression from the standpoint of like he's coming over and trying to attack her or anything like that. And honestly, the extent of his aggression, I want to clarify as well with both of these dogs, it's not like he's trying to kill the owner, right? He has just learned at a very, very young age that he can communicate boundaries with these individuals very effectively, right? Okay. So with the beagle, basically anytime this woman touches him in a way that he doesn't like, or is, he resource guards his food a little bit or his toys or things like that, he just will snarl and growl. And if, she were to persist with it, he would start snapping at her. And he's not breaking skin or anything, but like it's still like he's jumping up, trying to bite at her. He's saying, get the fuck away from me.
It's like an aggressive state still.
Yeah, it's absolutely still an aggressive state, right? The other dog is a Chihuahua with basically the same exact problem, right? The female owner, the woman, can't touch this dog in many cases. She's never been able to pick the dog up before, right? Like the dog gets very aggressive over that, biting, snapping, stuff like that, right? And I want to talk first and foremost how these behaviors are created, right? Because both of these dogs have shown clearly that they can turn the behavior on and off, right? They can turn the behavior on and off with different people in different environments and different contexts, right? Okay. With both of them, with the husband of the family, the dog is not 100% perfect, but borderline not an issue. Every now and then it'll kind of try to rehearse it towards them, but it does not persist at all, right? Okay. So when I look at things like this and I ask myself the question of like, is this like a genetic like miswiring, or is this a learned behavior? The first thing I ask myself is, can the dog turn the behavior on and off, right? Yeah. In both of these cases, the dog clearly can turn it on and off because it does it with one person. It doesn't do it with the other person. And then with us as new people, both of the dogs kind of tried it once or twice, very quickly realized it didn't work, and then stopped doing it almost completely after that.
Yeah.
Right? So that tells me it's a learned behavior, which means that at some point this behavior has been trained. Now, is there a genetic predisposition, like component at play? Sure, right? The one thing, getting back to takeaways from the conversation we had with Melanie the other day, I would say one of the takeaways was I really liked how she articulated and she used her dogs as an example of their default behavior. And when we say default behavior, I interpret that as kind of like how they're genetically programmed to respond to something, right? Yeah. And she explained that dogs can have this default behavior of they see something new and it's either this is a threat and a problem, right? Or default, this is new, I like it, let's explore it. Yeah. Right? Both of these dogs, I would say, lean on the side of, I see something new. This is potentially a threat. Yeah. Right? And if your dog goes into new situations of this is new, this might potentially be a threat, very, very quickly, they're going to be put in positions where when they experience something new and that thing is perceived as a threat, they're going to have to find a way to handle that threat. Right? Yep. And what are the options for handling threats? Basically, fight or flight, right? We talk about that a lot. Obviously, you have freeze. Everybody talks about freeze as a component. But generally, when it's problematic, it's either fight or it's flight, right? With both of the female owners of these dogs learned very early on that when they interact or do things to these dogs in ways that they don't like, that they could growl, snarl, and snap, and that behavior 100% of the time makes these people go away, right? Catch my breath for a minute. So we start working with these dogs, right? And obviously there is an obedience component at play if we need to be able to communicate with these dogs better. But when I look at the very, very, very first thing we have to do when we're working with a dog like this is we have to immediately take away the reinforcement behind whatever behavior it is that they're exhibiting, right?
Yeah.
And let's look at handler aggression from the standpoint of setting boundaries when the person does something that they don't like. What is the reinforcement behind that behavior?
The reinforcement behind it is they go away?
Yes. Right? Yeah. The human stops.
Yeah,
the human goes away. Now, this is so counterintuitive to what a lot of people would think, right? Because a lot of people would think when my dog is uncomfortable with something, I should stop.
Yeah.
I should leave them alone,
Yeah.
right? But the problem is, if we're constantly doing that in situations where they're telling us to stop doing normal day-to-day things that we need to do all the time, handle them, put collars on them, right?
Yeah.
Any of those types of things, you are very, very quickly going to create a monster that controls every aspect of what you do on a day-to-day basis in the home, right? So what do we need to do? Well, I'll use both dogs as an example. We start doing those normal day-to-day things. When they rehearse the behavior, we don't stop.
Yeah.
And then simultaneously, we teach alternative ways for them to communicate when they're uncomfortable with things. So let's talk about the beagle first and some of the things that we did.
Okay.
So the beagle, what we did was we did the thing that would get this dog to growl. In this case, it literally was if you sit on the floor and you start petting him, he would start snarling at you. Right? That was just like his behavior. He just said, fuck you. I'm going to snarl at you.
Yeah.
If you persist, I'm going to jump up and try to snap at you, stuff like that. Right? So we sat on the floor, and I did this first with him. Right? I sat on the floor. I started petting him. He started rehearsing the behavior. And I sat there, and I kept petting him. And I kept petting him. And I kept petting him. And I kept patting him. And maybe 7, 8, 9 minutes later of him snarling, snapping, stuff like that, what happened, and I did a lot of repetitions of this, is one of two things would happen. One of three things would happen, right? He would either persist and try to jump up and snap at me, which at that point I gave a correction for that specific behavior. I didn't correct for the growling and the snarling because he was thinking about making a mistake, but he hadn't made the mistake yet.
Yeah.
He was trying to be intimidating, but by just removing the reinforcement behind it, obviously, we were showing him that it wasn't working and kind of calling his bluff. Like, are you going to do something with this or are you not going to do something with this? And obviously to clarify with everybody, if you're working with a dog there's a lot of intensity behind it, you would put safety protocols in place for this, right? Things like muzzles or stuff like that, or I'll talk about the safety protocols we used in the case of the Chihuahua.
Okay.
So if he jumped up and tried to snap, we gave him a big correction for that.
Yeah.
But outside of that, I just said, sorry, dude, this behavior you're used to working is not working anymore, right? So that was thing number one that he did. Thing number two that he did was, in many cases, I did it. And then after 5 minutes or so, he was like, all right, well, this isn't working. And he kind of just put his head down and just laid there.
Yeah.
And just said, all right, fine. Right? So he kind of just gave into it, right? Because obviously there's nothing inherently aversive about, being pet, right?
Yeah.
And that's something else we talked about, the other time, is a lot of times it's the anticipation of something bad happening, right, is what creates a lot of these types of problems. So in his case, in some of the cases, he would just lay down and he was like, all right, fine. The growling isn't working, whatever. I might as well just sit here and accept this. Or in some cases, maybe even thought, all right, I guess this isn't so bad. Right.
Yeah.
And then thing number three that he did was we would pet him, interact with him. He'd growl. And then what he would do is he would actually get up and walk away. Right?
Yeah.
Bingo. Right? So in those cases, the instruction was if he gets up and walks away, we then stop.
Yeah.
Right? So the reinforcement behind the behavior is us stopping. So we are reinforcing an alternative response. So instead of reinforcing the growling and the snarling and the intimidation, we're reinforcing avoidance. Right? Which is fantastic. That's obviously what we want. So that's thing number one we did to start working through this. Right? With this particular dog. And we'll talk about with that particular dog a lot of other issues that were happening in the house, obviously, that were contributing to him being in this kind of puffed up fucking macho state of mind, right? Yeah. So with the Chihuahua, exact same process, right? The only difference was that dude was biting a little bit harder. So we put in place some safety protocols. Okay. And what did we do? We used, we have these long, like, welding bite gloves, right? You guys have probably seen in some of my videos. So we just put those on and we did the exact same process, right? Pat him, hang out with him, right? He was going ham, all right, like snarling, biting at the fingers, all that kind of stuff. And we just said, dude, like, I'm not doing anything to you, right? You got to just sit here and just tolerate this, right? Did that, progressed to picking up the dog, right? Because not that I say you should pick up your dogs all the time, but with little dogs, there are many cases where you have to be able to pick them up to manage them or put them into a kennel or lift them onto like a high surface or into a car or something like that.
Yeah.
So that is a necessity we had to get past with the dog. And that one I actually have a video of, I'll show you, that I think is interesting to show the progression of removing the reinforcement behind some of these behaviors, right? So let me pull this video up real quick. Where are you? Here it is. Is this it? So look at this little guy. This is the woman doing it. The one that...
Oh, yeah.
You see, obviously snarling, biting at the gloves. Right?
Yeah, right. Once you're doing better with this is going to make you a movie star, buddy.
But you see how, right? So he tried the behavior one time.
Yep.
Didn't work. And I was like, wait a minute.
Yep.
This is different. Right? And watch, she does it 2 or 3 more times here.
2 more of those.
So watch the second one. So that first one, very intense, obviously.
Yeah.
Now watch this next one here. So significantly less intense.
Way quicker. Yeah.
The trauma is so real.
No, it's bad.
And then we got one more, you'll see.
It's not bad up here.
Now he's falling asleep. Oh, yeah, his eyes are closed. Sure.
He's sick of this.
All right, one more, buddy.
Hardly anything.
Yeah.
Right?
Dang.
So I don't want to make it seem like this is a super quick process because it's absolutely not.
No.
Right? We're repatterning in these states of mind where, like, this dog, I believe, is like 6, if I'm not mistaken, this Chihuahua. Like, this dude has been rehearsing this behavior for fucking ever.
Yeah.
Right? So obviously he's going to try to persist with that behavior. And another thing is there's something in dog training science called an extinction burst, which basically means that as you're removing the reinforcement behind certain behaviors, you're trying to stop something, that it's not like, I don't know if like linear is the correct word. It doesn't just go from like here to like, and then it's gone, right? It'll start tapering off. And then when the dog starts seeing, wait a minute, this behavior isn't working anymore, they'll intensify that behavior because they're used to it working, right? They're like, this usually works, so I must need to try harder in order to stop it, right? So a lot of times you'll see extinction bursts and you'll kind of see it come in peaks and valleys like that before it finally tapers off completely.
Yeah.
But that video I really liked because I think that shows firsthand exactly how the process works in a lot of times of them simply realizing the behavior doesn't work. And it's like, I think sometimes we want these really quick, easy solutions for stuff like that of like, okay, well, I just correct it one time and it just stops, right? But that's not the case. And I'm not saying corrections are wrong to implement in some of those cases. And in sometimes what we'll find is that we'll do this process of removing the reinforcement for a while, but the behavior in and of itself it becomes habitual where they're not even doing it necessarily because of the reinforcement they gain of the person going away. They're doing it because that habit that they've created of doing it is just reinforcing in and of itself, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes when the behavior issues hit that point, you do need to add in punishment in order to suppress the remainder of it. But if we're only doing the punishment side of things and we're not solving what caused the problem in the first place, which is every time these dogs do something like this, we stop, we're shooting ourselves in the foot.
Yeah.
Right?
For sure.
And I think that's really important to realize where it's like this behavior took 3 years to create and become that strong of a habit. It's going to take a little bit of time to remove some of that in the dog's mind. Right? And both of these dogs are still on the journey. We're not like past it with either of them, right? We're still working through it, and it's only been a couple of weeks now at this point. In that Chihuahua's case, I think I just had their second session, right? So very, very early in the process. That video was from session number 1. And I actually just saw them for their second session 2 days ago, Saturday, I believe. And the Beagle is, I think 2 weeks into things as well, 2 or 3 weeks into things as well.
Yeah.
Right. So they still got the journey to go, and we're still going to be working through this. But I just thought it was really interesting that we had both of them in at the same time with the same type of behavior to be able to showcase some of this process of working through these kinds of things.
Yeah.
Because again, handler aggression issues, it can be so challenging to work through because there's no amount of training we're going to do that's going to make it easier for the owner. The owner needs to step up to the plate and show the dog, I'm not scared of you anymore.
Yeah.
Right? Because being scared of the dog is what created those problems. Right?
Yeah, 100%.
So go ahead. Were you going to say something?
No, I was going to just ask, because I think it'd be fun to ask, but do you feel like, because like a Chihuahua, for example, do you feel like genetic predispositions have anything to do with how they have that kind of leaning toward it's new, I'm going to fight it?
Ask that again.
Like, like, how we were talking about, like Dr. Melanie was talking about, like, they either
Yes.
something's new, oh, it's good. Something's new, oh, I'm kind of afraid of it. Do you feel like, especially like with the Chihuahua, I guess, is there like any kind of genetic predispositions that would make it lean to because, Chihuahuas have that like notoriety that they kind of like fight.
A little tenacity.
Yeah, a little tenacity. Do you feel like that, like a predisposition, like of its breed, is anything that causes that?
I think breed plays a role in things from the standpoint of when dogs are designed to behave a certain way. And we're talking like genetically, like we are hand selecting dogs that are really good at certain things because of their genes. Those things can be misplaced in the wrong areas.
Yeah.
Right. So, let's just take a Beagle, right? A Beagle obviously is bred for hunting.
Yeah.
Right. Specifically, they have a really good scent. Right. They're very determined. Right. A lot of your hunting dogs need to be very sound and stable and willing to fight through some adversity while they're out hunting.
Yeah.
Right. Not scared off very easily. Right.
Yeah.
If you have a dog that has all of those traits, right, of being a determined, independent worker, right, and they're a little bit disposed to also kind of seeing new things as a threat.
Yeah.
All of that determination and independence and stuff like that can get shifted into the wrong thing, which is my owner's a threat, and I need to be very determined and independent of keeping her away from me when I feel she's a threat, right? So that can make your job 10 times harder, right?
Yeah.
Chihuahuas, I actually don't know exactly what Chihuahuas are bred for.
I don't either.
Let's look it up.
Gotta figure it out.
My assumption is maybe some type of hunting, but I could be wrong.
I don't know. I don't know what kind of hunting you would do.
Let's see. What are Chihuahuas bred for? Chihuahua's life expectancy 12 to 20 years.
Jesus.
Insane. All right.
Anything?
Hold on.
Okay.
Well, this is very interesting.
Oh.
Well, hold on. Hard to say. I'm seeing a lot of different things like what are Chihuahuas bred for hunting? It says for millennia, Chihuahuas hunted rats, and today they'll charge after the occasional bird and squirrel, but I don't think they were necessarily bred for that.
I mean, it's a possibility.
The Toltecs and Maya civilizations bred them.
Maybe keep rodents out of their grain stores or something.
I don't know. Dated origins. It says they're very, very old. There's no written record
Of when
on why they were bred.
Yeah, or when it came to be, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pest control. Yeah.
Yeah.
Companionship and pest control.
That makes sense.
Chihuahuas are bred for. Seems they have served a number of purposes throughout history, while historical evidence doesn't indicate their primary function in ancient times as a pest controlling breed. Chihuahuas do possess a lot of tenacity and strong prey drive. As the breed became popular in North America, this quality helped them grow in popularity as household pest control. So it sounds like, I mean, some of the other things that I was reading here were basically saying that they were like almost like an idol for a lot of these ancient civilizations and stuff like that, and they probably just bred them with that tenacity in them. So whatever. So getting back to your original question, like so let's use dachshunds as an example that are bred to like burrow into holes and kill fucking animals, right? Like let's say chihuahuas are like 75% like that also.
Yeah.
Obviously, when you have a dog that has that tenacity and that intent on grabbing, shaking, and killing things, right?
Yeah.
If they're predisposed to also see things as threats, they're going to take those skills that are bred into them and use those skills that they have bred into them in order to make those threats go away.
Yeah.
Right. So it absolutely plays a role in it.
Yeah. And I was going to ask too, especially like any of these kind of breeds, like you're talking about, that have this tenacity, pit bulls, whatever, that have these reasonings to be bred. Do you feel like because they have that background, like, when they get their way, when they show that aggressiveness or whatever, and they get their way, do you feel like it just escalates so much quicker for them because they kind of have that mentality?
Yeah.
Like other than like maybe like a lab,
Yeah, I mean, again, it's the skills that they're designed for.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's what they do.
Yeah, so when they feel like they get that little leeway, they kind of just push it more and more.
Yeah, I mean, every dog is going to be motivated differently by different things, right? So the act of acting aggressively towards something for a dog like that probably, and this is me speculating right now, right? Probably jacks up their freaking adrenaline like through the roof, and they get that dopamine rush of like, wow, that felt really good that I used this intensity towards something and it worked. And for some dogs, I think that can compound so fucking quick, that it becomes a serious problem. And that's again the case with both of these dogs. So, I just thought it was really interesting because one of the things I had written down here was like just solutions that don't involve correction, right?
Yeah.
I think we too often will get into the mindset of every behavioral issue needs to be corrected away, where, again, looking at a lot of the conversations against balanced dog training is that we don't look at the root cause of things, where the root cause of a lot of these things is how it was created in the first place. So you got to be able to reverse engineer where the behavioral issue came from, stop that at its source, so we at least ensure it's not getting any worse. Right? Like this beagle, for example, like I said, we're a couple weeks into working with him, and basically the status update on him is he's still growling at the owner, right? It is not stopped. Like I said, it's only been a couple weeks that we've been working on this for, but the dog now no longer is biting, right? So the intensifying it to the bite has basically gone completely away, right? And he's walking away from the situation or calming down much more rapidly than he ever has in the past, right? Yeah. And we basically set up some ground rules with both of these dogs where it's like, you have to make sure that if you are going to interact with this dog, that if he displays any form of that aggression, that you are absolutely in a position to sit there as long as you need to until the behavior stops.
Yeah.
Plain and simple, right? That is something that that has to be ensured. And if we could ensure that this dog no longer achieves any sort of self-reinforcing wins for this behavior, at least at a bare minimum, we could ensure that it does not get any worse.
Yeah.
Right? That it plateaus off where it is. And then from there, if we don't continue to see a decline and we don't continue to see the extinction burst anymore where it intensifies and it just kind of sits at this baseline if he does it for 3 minutes, then walks away, and that's kind of where we plateau off with, then we could jump in and we could use corrections to get it the rest of the way there.
Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of what your formula or your recipe for a lot of this kind of stuff needs to look like. And I always try to start with, let's see how much we can get away with the dog just figuring it out on their own without us needing to suppress it, because you're going to have longer term results from that.
Yeah.
And on top of that, the owner then understands how to ensure that they never run into that situation again, because they're not accidentally communicating to the dog, hey, this is what I actually want you to do. Right. So I think that was really interesting. And then on top of that, you have all of the other factors in the home that cause the dog to feel like cause the dog to feel like, like I should be, being an asshole in the house, basically. Right. And it's so funny, like, ironically, like, as we're filming this podcast, I was actually texting that Beagle's owner this morning. So she has a sport dog collar, which, listen, we're pretty diehard e-collar technologies, collar users, or Dogtra. I like Dogtra also, but I like e-collar tech the best. But we'll use, like, Sport Dog is a high quality e-collar, and we'll use it. And with our programs, like, if you provide the e-collar, we take some money off of it. So if people have invested, a couple $100 into an e-collar, we try to help them out and see if we could use that one.
Yeah.
But she has a Sport Dog e-collar, and it's working fine. It's not an issue. But, like, even at, like, max levels on the Sport Dog e-collar, the dog was just not quite as responsive to it as I would have expected. He cares about it and it works. But there were a couple situations where we had this collar like maxed out on the walk, and he was like sniffing something using his fucking beagle nose. You hit that button and he was like, "No, I'm sniffing this." So I was a little surprised and like taken aback. I was like, "That's interesting." Like, we don't very, very frequently get dogs that like really blow off the e-collar, right?
Yeah.
So I started looking into it. And this is me. This is going to show you guys how uneducated I am on sport dog collars, because anybody that uses them probably knows this as very common knowledge. But this is for anybody that doesn't use them very often and maybe stumbles upon one or two. Yeah. So most of the sport dog e-collars have your levels in which you could use. So it's got 7 levels on the dial, and then it's got a low, medium, high button. So basically, I think it's 21 individual levels that you have on it. But then on top of those 21 different levels, the collar itself has a function similar to on like a in-ground fence, right? Where you could make the range of those 21 levels a low, a medium, or a high intensity, right? So we were like, what the hell? Like, why is this dog so not responsive to it? So I asked Michelle, because Michelle used to work at Sit Means Sit, and they use exclusively sport dog collars there. And she's like, oh yeah, it's probably, like, sport dog collars like run pretty hot. Like, it's probably just set at one of the lower settings. I was like, how do I change that? So she talked me through it, right? So then I got back in touch with the owner, and we found out actually, his was set at the lowest setting on it. So even at max level, it's like probably a third of what it, hypothetically would be in the higher tiers, right? But whatever. So I was texting her about that this morning, and she sent me an update on some of the on some of the other things that we've been kind of working at. So a couple of the other things that have been, issues is, one, he resource guards stuff, right? Toys and food specifically, right? 2, he's horrible about trying to get up on the counter and jumping for things that he doesn't want, right? And 3, his walk was really sloppy. So we'll break down then, when I did their last lesson, I went to the house, and obviously our first lesson, we were focused on removing the reinforcement behind the growling and stuff like that. But now we're at a place where it's like, okay, now we need to start chipping away at these other things to keep taking his head and bringing it down a few notches, taking his brain and bringing it down a couple notches and being more respectful over her. So like the resource guarding of toys, right? There was no concrete routine for how we take toys away from this dog, right? So we implemented, hey, this is how we teach a sound out command. This is, how we go and actually take the object from him with the feeding, right? Like, she was not feeding him in a terrible way necessarily, but she was kind of doing it in an unnatural way that was still putting a lot of pressure on him, right? Like, she was like sitting on the floor next to him while he was eating and stuff. And like, there wasn't really a good routine for making sure she's like claiming the bowl before she gives it to him and all that kind of stuff. So we made some adjustments for that, right? We got in a position where we clearly started correcting for the counter surfing. We were able to catch that and reduce the probability of that. And then the walks... and I'm absolutely not like ripping on this lady over this. Obviously, she's very wonderful, and she's been doing all of the homework really well. But she had this thing she was doing on the walk where she's got this beagle, and then she has a like a 14-year-old not chihuahua, I don't know, some little scruffy dog, whatever. And she was like, like most owners do, like, I want him to be able to be a dog and sniff. And I was like, okay, well, I don't have a problem with him sniffing as long as obviously you're structured about the in-between sniffing time, obviously. So we go out on the walk, and we go for like a little walk down her street. And she had this routine where she would put him into a calm and she would try to make him walk really nicely. And then she would stop and release him to sniff every single mailbox they walked by. So it was like she would heel him for like 15 feet and then release him, then heel him for 15 feet, then release him.
Oh my gosh.
So I was like, okay, I was like, maybe let's heel him like all the way to the end of the street.
Yeah.
Then you could let him sniff like one mailbox at the end. Because the problem was like, she was just like, she thought he was blowing her off, which he was a little bit, but like, she was really just confusing him more than anything, I think, because it was this constant like, go, come back, go, come back, go, come back. You know? Like, where he's just like constantly like never knowing like what to expect. And then you're creating these patterns of like every time you get near a mailbox, you're absolutely going to be able to sniff it, which makes them want to push and jump the gun on running off to sniff it. It's like, we just have to break some of those patterns. And the problem is too, like in addition to it confusing him, it creates more stress because then you're needing to correct him more for not healing in between. But like really the reason you're needing to correct him more is because of like the problem you're creating by being confusing about the walk. And, you know, the whole plan here is one, reduce pushy behavior, right? Clear pushy behavior, create inhibitions for and get the dog to respect those things, right? Two, have really clear routines for the things that you need to do to ensure that you have a safe and successful way with minimal conflict to take resources to interact with the dog, right? And make sure you're not accidentally reinforcing anything. And then two, reduce overall stress by reducing overall conflict, right? So with your training, right? If you're finding yourself needing to nag your dog with corrections all the time for your basic training, whether it's walking, whether it's downstays, bedstays, all those types of things, that's going to keep your dog in a baseline higher level of stress, which is going to make all those other problematic behaviors that much harder to work through.
Yeah.
You know?
100%.
But yeah, you know, she texted me with it. She said, you know, he has only been corrected one time for going for his food. You know, he stayed off the counters since I've corrected him there, and he did much, much better on his walk today, which is all good to go. So making some headway. And it's one of those things where it's like, just like you're playing the long game with some of this stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like I said at the beginning, like these dogs both, like I guarantee you this dog is still, like since our session we had on Saturday, is still fucking growling at this lady. Right?
Yeah.
But we've stopped the bleeding, right? You know what I mean? Like we've stopped the bleeding of it's not getting any worse, and all these other areas of his life are starting to get better, which is going to make that continue to get better as well, right?
Yeah.
And obviously in the Chihuahua's case, that dog is, you know, obviously you saw real time some of the progress that he's starting to make with things. So now it's just a matter of her starting to get on some of those things in the house with him, and she's now in her next session going to move to stage 2 of things like we did with this lady, where we're going to start looking at now, in addition to stopping the bleeding and making sure that the dog is not progressing further with this aggressive behavior, let's look at all the other aspects of the dog's life and start getting those things under control too.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But this is how I wanted to talk about this because this is how we create comprehensive behavioral modification programs for owners.
Yeah.
Right? Is you have to think about it's everything, right? Yeah. And just before you create that plan, you just have to stop the bleeding, right? I think that's the best way to put it, is ensure you don't progress further in the wrong direction, right? Whether it's your dog's aggressive towards people, right? Maybe it might mean temporarily to stop the bleeding, we don't have the dog around new people until we have a good routine for how we do it, right? Socialization, same, right? Handler aggression issues, right? Same, right? And if you could do that, then you could kind of, you could breathe for a minute, right? And you could look at one thing at a time that you start solving in the house to help the owner gain some headway with stuff.
Yeah. And, you know, just changing your owner's mentality on what they do, because I think a great point that you said was, you know, we want to combat like the issues at hand, but we never, like when you're in your own home, you never really think about the little subtle things that you're doing to create those said behaviors. So it's like those first 2 weeks, I mean, it's like mentally taxing for the dog, but it's also mentally taxing for your owner because they
You
have to
think about everything you're doing.
Yeah, every single thing. So
And that's why it's so hard. That's why like inner house aggression issues are so hard, is because you gotta be on it.
Yeah.
You gotta be on it.
all the time.
Yeah. And luckily in the case of these two dogs, like I said, one, both of the owners have had the dogs for long enough that they've learned how to live around these issues. You know what I mean? It's like whatever. Like worst case scenario, they do all the things they used to do and they know how to manage the dog really, really effectively and prevent the issue from arising, but it's not good, obviously.
Yeah.
But in a lot of cases when we're dealing with dogs and owners that have like really serious handler aggression issues, that's where it becomes a big problem.
Yeah.
When there's a lot higher risk, you have large, like both these dogs are small dogs, right?
Yeah.
And their bite force is like pretty small, right? And they're not really committed to the biting, where like we'll see some that it's like the handler aggression issue, like the risk level of is significantly higher.
Yeah.
Yeah. And those are the dogs where you start looking at, damn, like, do you want to be on edge all the time in your house? And if you slip up, like in these dogs' cases, like if they slip up, they might accidentally reinforce the behavior, and they might get like bit from the standpoint of like not even breaking skin, but just like, ow, that kind of hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where do you want the risk of, this dog is acting aggressive towards you and you got to be really on top of it at all times. And if you slip up, it's like the risk is like, you're going to the hospital to get shit stitched up constantly, right? Or worse, or things like that. It's like,
you don't want
that stuff's hard, man.
Yeah.
So, that, and then I'm trying to think what else. I did a virtual consult yesterday with a client in New York City who I've been doing a lot of virtual consults, and a lot of them are dogs fighting in the house, man.
Oh, I'm sure.
A lot of it is dogs fighting in the house. And they have two dogs. One is like a blind and deaf dog that's like 11 years old. Oof. And the other is like a younger, like, I think he said it like a Katalua Australian Shepherd mix or some shit like that, right? Jeez. And same deal. They started getting in fights with each other in the house. And it's just like, I have like my notes from it. Like I'm just diagnosing like all of the problems these dogs had. Like, and I've said it before, I think when we were talking about, dogs fighting in the house, some of the podcast episodes we specifically done on it. If you have dogs fighting in the house, you can't have, or dogs that are acting aggressive towards you in the house, you cannot have behavioral issues.
Yeah.
You just can't, right? And that sounds extreme, right? Because everybody's like, well, every dog's a fucking individual. And like, like there's going to be some things they do that you can't control. It's like, yes, I get it, right? Like there are some things my dogs do that are annoying from like an arousal standpoint and stuff like that. But if you have big behavioral issues with your dog in the house, if your dog is still very reactive, right, out on a walk or in the house, if your dog is completely uncontrollable when people come over your house, like if your dog, cannot socialize with another dog without attacking them, right, like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, your probability of working through your fighting issues in the house is close to zero. Yeah. Close to zero. Right. So it's funny, like in this case, like they've had these dogs separated because obviously the older dog, blind and deaf, right, just got beat up pretty good like a week ago in a fight, right? So they have them totally separate for that. And I was like, we can't even think about reintroducing these dogs until we get your dog's reactivity under control, right? So that was all we talked about in the virtual class was like, it's got to stop. Right. Because the reactivity, like, let's look at the reactivity and your dog's intensity. Like one of the things, they live in Brooklyn where like they have like kind of like a really small front yard that's like fenced in. You know what I mean? Like off of like a couple steps, like from their condo or whatever it is. Yep. And like they said, if the dog is out there and a dog walks by, it goes so absolutely fucking apeshit bananas. It's like, okay, well, what would your dog be doing if that fence wasn't there? Probably running at that dog and trying to bite that dog or try to attack that dog. Yeah. Right? So what's your dog doing to your other dog? Your dog is taking that same exact intensity they're throwing towards the dogs on the other side of the fence, and it's putting it all towards your dog.
Your dog, yeah.
Right? So it has to stop. Like before you ever think about reintroducing these dogs back together, it has to stop. And luckily in their case, they've done some training before. They have an e-collar, but they've never used it above like a 40 or something like that, Yeah. So it's like their first instruction was just squash that fucking reactivity. Yeah. Get that so under control that your dog thinks twice about throwing that intensity towards other things. And then once you've built on some success with that, then we could think about retransitioning to getting these dogs back together with each other.
Yeah.
You know? But it's just like, you know, if you don't get that stuff under control, you're constantly going to be playing this game of one, allowing the dog to rehearse this dangerous behavior that in the past they've thrown that type of dangerous behavior towards your other dog, right? And then thing number two, let's say we get the dogs back together with each other successfully, and one day you run into a situation where both of the dogs are together when that dog rehearses that intensity towards another dog, then you run the risk of redirected aggression, right? Where the dog is in such an intense state of mind that because it can't get to that dog, it's taking it and getting to this dog, which is what we hear all the time. I did another fucking virtual call like 2 weeks ago, something like that, we'll say, with a client out in Durango, Colorado, which was really interesting because Durango, Colorado is where Vinny came from.
Really?
And actually, this guy was referred to me by Vinny's old owner, which I thought was hilarious.
Wow.
Hilarious.
That's crazy.
Shout out Diana Ray. It's Vinny's old owner. Very, very nice Scottish lady.
In Durango?
Super Scottish, man.
Wow.
The first time I ever talked to her. She was telling me about Vinny, and she's talking about Vinny and this Scottish accent.
Yeah, thick Scottish accent.
Loved it. Whatever. So this guy's got 2 dogs, right? Yeah. And one's a Malinois and one's some other fucking dog, right?
Yeah.
And it was the same exact situation, right? The dog is crazy fucking reactive on leash, right? And has started taking that energy and just tossing it onto the other dog and created this habit of the dogs getting into fights with each other anytime this dog would see a trigger. Because it's like, I know I'm not going to be able to get to that, but I know I can get to this.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Jeez.
It's wild. It's just like, it's it sounds extreme, but like you cannot have those issues. If you want to successfully have 2 dogs, you cannot have those issues. And if you think your dogs are good currently, but you have those issues, just a matter of time. Here's another why. Now everything's coming to me, right? Okay, so I was doing an in-home lesson in Detroit like a month ago.
Okay.
Right? Long story, whatever. Client in Detroit. I was out working with them for the day. And I'm out there and we're walking around their neighborhood and there's fucking dogs everywhere in this neighborhood. Yeah. And all of them have like the chain link gated backyards, where the dog can see on one side of the house and the other side of the house, right? And there were 3 houses that we walked by that there were 2 dogs loose in the backyard. There's 3 houses within like 4 blocks, right? That we walked by the house. These dogs went so ape shit fucking bananas at us walking by the house that the one in particular, like a dog fight kind of started with these 2 dogs in the backyard.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and I'm not talking just like a little, like I'm talking like they turned at each other and for a minute were fucking going at each other. Right? And this happened at 3 houses. The one was the most intense, but it's like, I don't know, like the owner was there because we walked by the house later and the dogs were fucking inside of the house. But like, I don't know how you as an owner cannot hear that happening outside and just think, oh, they'll be fine, right?
Yeah.
Like, no, like those dogs will kill each other at some point. Like literally, like you will have a dead dog at some point because of shit like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? But the dogs are good together.
Oh, yeah.
Right? They would never do that to each other, but it's like you put them in that position enough times and you're not mindful enough of their other behavioral issues, that intensity is going to get thrown to the other dog, and then you're going to have a serious problem on your hands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think especially too, like your client, you said Brooklyn? Was it?
The virtual call? Yeah, Brooklyn.
Yeah, Brooklyn. Like, I mean, in a large city like that where there's like nowhere to go. It's like your house or you're on the
just moved there from Florida too. 6 months ago, they moved there from Florida.
Oh God!
So that's why things have like really perpetuated since they've been there.
Sure.
It's just such a different environment.
Yeah, there's like there's no escaping. So it's like you have to figure that out like immediately, like you said. Or I think that's probably what it was. It was just these 2 dogs had nowhere to like put those maybe things that didn't matter in Florida, but now it's like they're just stuck by each other.
Yeah.
So that's crazy.
It just can be such a mess, man.
Yeah.
So go back. I don't remember what episode number it was, but there was a podcast episode we did that we titled "Get It Under Control." Yeah. Remember that one? I kind of went fucking off on it a little bit. and I was talking about this dog Zay that we had come in. It was a pit bull, right? That was crazy fucking reactive, right? Redirecting on owners, shit like that, right? Like redirecting on the other dog in the house. They had 4 dogs, and the one he couldn't be around because they had a problem with each other, right?
Yeah, I remember.
And I just talked about like you just have to get the behavior the fuck under control. Right? It has to stop now, right? Not tomorrow, now, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny. I still talk to that owner, right?
Yeah.
I still get updates from them. I got one somewhat recently. Let me pull it up here.
Really? Still killing it?
Here we go. Still crushing it, man.
There we go.
Yeah, November was the last time I talked to them, and she just said, yeah, she had to take him to the vet for something. Yeah, this was just the update, right? So she said, I took Zay to the vet for the first time since training, and he did great. Did a downstay in the lobby the entire time without any issues with people, dog and cat distraction. Got pets from the vet and tech. I muzzled him for the exam. He had a tiny bit of growling with the second ear swab, but was fine otherwise. They were very impressed with his progress and said they love you guys. And as you could see, Ches and Zay are getting along with no issues. They're napping and playing together. Yet again, we can't thank you enough. And then they sent me like these pictures, right? This is Ches. This is a dog he would go after, and they're just fucking chilling with each other, right?
Nice.
And like they hit that point because like his issues with the other dogs were not because he was dog aggressive, right? He was just stupidly reactive and high strung at all times. All times. His base level stress was so fucking high because he got himself into these adrenalized, intense states of mind, and he just learned that he could turn that energy back on his owners, back on the other dog in the house, and there was no harmony because of it. And because we squashed all those other behavioral issues, the issues of them fighting with each other went away. And we never had to address that.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Just figured out how to manage his own feelings or whatever you want to call it.
Learn to
emotions.
think, you know? Like when your dog's acting like that, they're not fucking thinking.
No, they're just reacting.
Yeah. So I don't know. Like I said, kind of all over the place, but
No, I think it was a great conversation.
big takeaways from today for everybody. I want to be one, when you're creating a behavioral modification plan, you have to start first and foremost with stopping the bleeding and making sure you're not making the issue worse, whether it's by making sure the dog can't rehearse the behavior or that you have removed the reinforcement behind the behavior. One of the two, right? Thing number 2 is going to be then looking at all of the other issues that you're having and making sure one at a time they go away. You cannot be okay with, I just manage it really well. It has to go away.
Yep.
Right? And then thing number 3 is with a lot of these dogs, if it took you a long time to get there, it's going to kind of take a long time to reverse some of it from the standpoint of some of these handler aggression issues of the dog becoming really comfortable with things or any of that. That doesn't mean that reactivity and stuff needs to take a long time to stop. That stuff you could get under control, and fucking squash, right? But from the standpoint of some of these other things, right, some of it is going to take a little bit of time.
Yeah.
Right. And I think those are going to be the biggest thing. And then thing number 4 is there's a lot of behavioral issues out there that can be stopped by just looking at how it was created in the first place and reversing that.
Yep. Yeah. And like you said, your dog may have been rehearsing the same thing for years. So it's like, don't get discouraged if it takes a couple months to really start a new path,
Truth.
So
That's what I got for you guys.
I liked it. I think they will too.
Hopefully. If you guys have any questions on any of it, let us know, obviously.
Yeah.
I really, really enjoy troubleshooting and problem solving interesting cases. Like these two dogs, the Chihuahua and the Beagle, are interesting cases.
Yeah.
Right? Because they're not, they're a little outside of the norm of the things that you might think you need to do to stop certain things.
Yeah.
Right? So, as you guys experience interesting cases, fill us in. Let us know what you've done to help dogs like this in the past, or if you have any questions further as far as the thought process of working through a lot of these things, feel free to reach out about it. I just keep the communication open.
Leave us a comment.
Leave us a comment. Tell us about the most interesting case you've ever.
There it is.
All right, guys. See you next time.